Good morning, Jim's Little Boat. I'm Jim, and today I thought we would talk a little bit about making a new cover for your keel winch. This is a board that goes just below the companionway, and if you get an old boat, it's going to be either beat up like this one or probably completely missing. So I thought I'd share with you how to make a new one. I took my old one and I dimensioned it out, and we'll share the dimensions as we go along. I ended up making a brand new one for my friends, the Webbers, who had a barn boat and it was missing. This one's made out of birch plywood. The originals were teak on top of MDO, but they're not terribly hard to make if you have the dimensions, but you do need a table saw, and you have to know how to make this cut right here. That bevel is difficult to cut. And then there's the issue of the relief on the back for the winch cover, and we'll show you how to make that. So this is kind of a long step-by-step video, and you can skim through it, but if you're ready to make your own, this should give you enough information to do the whole thing. Unless you're a very experienced woodworker, probably the most difficult part of this project is to route out the back of the panel right where it meets the face of the winch. It's too thick if you leave it ½ inch, so you got to take away 5/16. And the way to do that is to start by making a pattern, and we'll do that on the table saw. To make the template, just get a piece of plywood and draw a rectangle that's 7½ by 5 3/4. I happen to center it on this scrap I had laying around just because that's how I do things. I measured from the edge to the line and found out it was 1 5/8. So I set the blade up so that it's 1 5/8 to the inside edge of the blade. And now I'm going to do a plunge cut, and you can kind of watch how I do that. I will push down on the board while I bring the blade up through the piece of plywood. And just to get myself started, I have a mark on the table saw fence where the center of the blade is, and I've marked the center of the piece of wood in the plunge cut, so I can just kind of line all that up. Now I'll lower the blade, start the saw, and we will make the first cut. We have a template. It's a little too big, but that's never mind. That will work perfectly. We'll attach it with a couple screws, and when it comes time, we can route the back. After I made the pattern, I had to make this new base plate for the router. Its job is to allow the router to move back and forth on the pattern, and that will all become very clear when we get the blank ready and we start routing out the back. But you will have to make a new base plate for your router, and it needs to be almost twice as long as the opening in your pattern. The thickness of your pattern for routing out the back is going to be determined by the bit that you use in your router, because you got to have the bearing hit the pattern and stick up just a little bit, say about 1/4 inch for your first cut, and then you'll adjust it. So in this particular case, I made my pattern 1 inch thick. But depending on the bit that you buy, it might be thinner. We need to cut a bevel on the top side of the blank top inside, and it's got to be 26 degrees. Now this is difficult to do on a table saw, but not impossible. The challenge is to do it safely. You could probably do this with a belt sander, but that would be a long, tough haul to put a 26-degree bevel on the whole length of the board. So I'm going to show you how I do it on the table saw, and concede that there might be better, safer methods, but I've done this 4 or 5 times, so I'm pretty confident it will work for me. You decide if it's safe for you to do it. To get this bevel cut, I'm going to start with an oversized piece of 1/2 inch thick birch plywood. There's the old piece laying on top, which is kind of my pattern for the whole thing. And I am going to cut the bevel first on this oversized blank, because if I screw it up, I'll still have other chances. Cutting this bevel will be a lot safer if I have a thicker board. So I'm going to take this piece of 3/4 pine and use double-sided tape to put it down on my blank. And that should give me enough thickness to push it up against the fence and cut that bevel. The spacer board needs to be taped to the face side of the finished project. That will put the bevel on the correct side. That's 6 pieces. That should be plenty to hold them together just for the one saw cut we're going to make. That angle seems to match up nicely, so it's close or right on, I don't know which. Now it's time to cut this angle. It says 65 degrees on my template, but the complement of 65 is 35, so we'll set the table saw up for 35 degrees and make that cut. So the bevel we just cut goes down on the face of the table saw. The good side goes up, and we're going to take the cut on the left-hand side. Doesn't really matter where you cut it because the board's extra long. So the original blank that I took out of my boat has a little taper to it. It's just a skinch less than 24 down here at the bottom. And up here at the top, it's 24 3/16. I'm going to just make the whole blank 24 1/8. If it's too big, then we can easily trim 1/8 of an inch off this side. But I'm not going to try to recreate that taper. And when you do this third cut, make sure you put the bevel up against the table saw fence. We wouldn't want to cut that bevel off after all that hard work. And then finally, we'll rip it to a width of 12 1/4, and we'll have our basic blank. We made our basic blank. It's got a bevel here and a bevel up here at the top, and all we have left to do is locate the hole and then flip it over and do the recess in the back with the router. We need to make this hole for the handle. It's a 2-inch hole, and it is 8 inches from the bevel on that side, and the center of it is 3 3/4 inches from the bevel at the top. And I'm going to use a hole saw. It needs to be bigger than you'd think because you want to be able to get it on and off without removing the handle. So you need a little room there to make it all work. Start it from the front side and then you'll finish it from the back side. That will give you a nice clean hole. And don't forget to clamp it down because that saw will jerk the drill right out of your hands. We've drawn the rectangle for the relief that goes on the back side. And we've indexed everything off 2 edges. This first line is 5 3/4 from the beveled side, and then you go on over measure from the same place, and that line is 13 1/2. Measure from this beveled edge, it's 1 1/2, and from the same beveled edge, it's 7 1/4. Now we're ready to attach the pattern. We have the pattern set up on the back side of the piece. It's screwed in with these screws. And I'm just going to take the router I've already started and work it back and forth a few times. Let's see what that looks like. Let's measure it and see if that's right. There's a 1/4 inch bar, and it sits below the edge, I'd say a 1/16, so that's 5/16. So I'm kind of thinking that we have made the piece we need. We've still got to round the corner. Let's do that. I'll cut this piece off with a bandsaw just because I have one. If I didn't, I could go ahead and use a jigsaw or even a hand saw and then hand sand it to get the radius there. Radius is done. Webbers will need to drill 2 holes to attach it to their boat, but they'll have to do those when they've got it in the boat and they can see exactly where the holes were. So the whole project, if you've got the tools, takes 4 or 5 hours. Not that big a thing. You got to have a table saw and you need a router and you need time to make the pattern. But if you have a friend with a table saw and a bottle of whiskey, maybe you could just get it done for you. This project can be done without a table saw, but a table saw makes it a lot easier and a lot quicker. You can build this project in 3 or 4 hours if you have the right tools and the right materials. So if you don't have a table saw, cultivate a friend who has a table saw.